will mention that, like that Felix Seder thing, just because I think people know that's my pet, theory about that Felix Seder plays a big role, largely in part just because 2 and some odd years ago, Wayne Barrett just kept telling me over and over again, it's all Felix Seder. And with the Mueller report having dropped, maybe we will see it. I suspect we will see at least parts of it. Don't know how much.
He sounds like a white-collar criminal.
Felix Seder?
Oh, yeah.
Well, what we do know about Felix Seder is seems to be some type of FBI, CIA asset to the extent that Loretta Lynch, former Attorney General, but when she was back at the Eastern District of the U.S. Attorney's Office, wrote an affidavit on his behalf after he stabbed a guy in the face with a broken glass.
Wow. Damn.
Which is a weird thing for someone to do. But apparently he's been an asset to the FBI. Supposedly there's reporting that he was the guy who got the CIA bin Laden's phone number, which is in the way that they tracked him. And there's this lawsuit that basically claims he ran off with another, I guess it was a mayor's family in Kazakh, with $400 some odd million that he was going to launder. This is what the lawsuit alleges. He was going to launder through the Trump Tower in Moscow, as well as other places around the world, and also coming back to Trump Soho Tower. And so this guy was a money launderer and a special advisor to Donald Trump. And
he sounds like the antagonist from a Bond movie.
Yeah,
to
exactly.
be perfectly honest, without even knowing any of that stuff you just said.
Well,
Felix
I
Seder.
think he was a stoolie. He was an asset, and he was probably run out of the New York FBI office. So, I don't know. You start to get, obviously, I mean, nothing I've said is speculative. It's all been reported. There is a lawsuit. There is an affidavit that Loretta Lynch put in there. What the meaning of it is, I don't know. But
intrigue.
There is some intrigue here, and it suggests, in terms of the genesis of the investigation that Mueller ultimately took over from Comey after Comey was fired by the president. The president said, I fired him because he was investigating me. I mean, that's, there's no doubt that...
I hope we can see our way to look past this.
Right. I mean, look, there's no doubt that there were people who used this investigation for their own purposes, ranging from, people who wanted to be on TV quite a bit, and to people who thought that maybe it would help them electorally. We know the Democrats didn't run on that particularly, but on some level, it's in the background. I think it was used at times that when it looked like Donald Trump was in serious legal jeopardy, that it may have made some legislators more hesitant, Republicans, to push certain things. But in terms, and certainly there were people who have, I think, who used it for, to inflate their podcast numbers or to promote a foreign policy. I mean, that's what happens in politics. People use different things that are happening. But as far as the genesis of it, you have a campaign where they bring on a guy who's been monitored by spy services, Carter Page, who I met and I think is just a raving lunatic. And I'm not sure, I would trust him to lead me out of a building with 2 sets of stairs, frankly. But this is a guy that they had been monitoring because of his behavior, and then he joins the Trump campaign. There are other connections. I don't know to what extent you see Felix Seder, and if you know he's an asset at that time, well, then it makes a lot of sense. If you don't know he's an asset, then you start to wonder, like, why is all this money coming into these Trump towers? Why are all these meetings? I happen to think Donald Trump did not think he was going to win. And in those situations, like, you promise people stuff if you think it's going to help your relationship. That's called business, right? I mean,
called making deals.
Yeah. Hey, Brendan, I may get a TV show. So why don't you hang out here and put in a couple of extra hours? And when I get that TV show, you're going to be a producer. I don't think I'm going to get the TV show, but Brendan comes in and puts in extra hours, and all of a sudden I get the TV show, and like, oh, damn it. I've got to let Brendan work on the show now. I screwed up. But I'm not convinced that wasn't the nature of it. But from the perspective of investigators who are looking into this in the summer of 2015 or 2016, and then the president fires the lead investigator and announces, I needed to get him off. Basically, like, I didn't like the fact he was investigating me. Like, I'm not sure what people are supposed to do at that point. Did other people run with it? Absolutely. And I think people have to be held to account with how far they got out in front of this story. But the story was real. The investigation did exactly what it should do. And in the meantime, it also found a lot of malfeasance by a lot of different players, which has been going on. And I don't think that excuses it, though. I think we should be rounding up more of them. And I don't, whether it's, whatever firms were doing crap like this. I don't know why they weren't rounded up in the first place. I do know why they weren't. So I don't, I have no idea what's in the report at this point. I don't know that we have an accurate reflection from William Barr, who, but I imagine we're going to see parts of the report. I don't know that I should believe William Barr's assessment that, in fact, Russia interfered in the election. But, like I said from day one, of course they did. It would be malfeasance for them not to. We do it. I mean, how could we not be doing this? That's what's done. And there is a fundamental problem with the country that, allows for that level of interference to even be considered to have any implications on the outcome of an election. There were, 20 different things that I think had gone a different way. The outcome would have been different. But yes, there's an underlying problem in the country that it would be so close. And, I'm not going to, we can have other conversations. We've had millions of them as to what the underlying problems are. But that aside, the idea that this was a hoax from the beginning is absurd. Yes, there were people who got out in front of where the investigation was, but to suggest that the whole thing should have been completely ignored, I even think the first Benghazi hearing probably was worthwhile. It was the 8th one that became, somewhere along that spectrum where it became ridiculous, and to spend your time covering it would have been a joke. But to completely ignore this and to assume that it was initiated because of these weird, these other sort of narrow agendas, and it may be the case that this was exploited to achieve other goals. Definitely. I mean, that's what happens all the time, right? I mean, it's
that explained my interest in it.
Well, I mean, it does all things people try to use in politics. People try to make a case from Donald Trump's win that we should have a different type of Democrat win. And we make those arguments. Or, be the nominee. People look at, this is the way that politics work. And I think it's a perfectly legitimate criticism to make of the way that this was exploited. And I think we did a fairly decent job over the course of this to not, reward those who were, I think, transparently or even less transparently trying to use this investigation and get out in front of it in some way. Now, I happen to not think that any of this is resolved in any way. I think there's, from the beginning, I think we were talking like most of this is going to come down to financial. I mean, I think we were saying that on day one, literally, that it was just going to be stories about money laundering. But that was basically all based upon, some discussions in an interview that we did on this program with Wayne Barrett, who has been following Donald Trump and this whole stuff for a long time. But I can understand why people in Washington might have been like, hey, we're investigating him in a fairly routine thing, and then he fires the head of the FBI. That's weird. It's a little bit weird. But yes, were there politicians and media figures who basically thought, like, I'm going to ride this? Yeah, of course. And, they've got to dig themselves out of a hole. But hundreds of thousands of people did not die. Millions of people were not made internal and external refugees. We ended up not having World War III. If we haven't at this point, I don't think we're going to, at least as this is a foundation. I'm not saying there weren't bad things that came out of this, but certainly no worse than, what's happening to people in Puerto Rico, for God's sakes.
There's no comparison.
Right. Exactly. To the extent that there's been any damage done by this, it's that maybe we don't see as much about what's going on in Puerto Rico. But, to the extent that we do know stuff about Puerto Rico, there's a decent crossover by, I don't, to the extent that I saw the most coverage of Puerto Rico, it mostly came on Hayes' show. And then, Naomi Kant's going down there and, the Democracy Now! And stuff like this, but it's not like Fox News was covering a lot of stuff that was going on in Puerto Rico.
They were doing white nationalism.
Yeah, Tucker Carlson was not featuring the plight of Puerto Ricans and their lack of electricity. So that is
the media is bad, folks. I think is the conclusion.
Yeah, and here's the thing. I think that is also
media.
Here's the thing that I think is also
good.
I think here's the thing. I mean, but we don't do any firsthand reporting, and everything that we do on this program is contingent upon there being reporters, and so make no mistake about that. We are not reporters. We are aggregators who assess and essentially curate and editorialize based upon reporting that exists. And anybody on YouTube who tells you they're reporting anything is full of garbage. And to the extent that we provide any service, it's, we read it and we make assessments so that you don't have to, and over time you judge whether our assessments and what we present is relevant and at least sound in some manner. And that's the way you should approach all of your media. And when you find that it's not, then you theoretically act accordingly.
Yeah, the amount of funding that it takes, the amount of overhead that it takes to go out there and do real reporting in the world is a lot. It's too much for a podcast, certainly, and it scares me that it's drying up.
Yes, it's very problematic. And I will add that the power of cable news is greatly diminished from where it was just even 10, 15 years ago. Certainly 20 years ago. In the run-up to the Iraq War, if you looked on page 8 or 10 of the New York Times or the Washington Post or Maybe you saw reporting from McClatchy. You could see tells that this the run-up to the Iraq War was full of crap. But it was overwhelmed because there was no mechanism like there is today to amplify those stories, to push back. But social media, the growth of YouTube, which did not exist at that time, but basically social media, allowed for people who were, smaller groups of people, to amplify counter narratives. So it is true. There was a lot of people who anticipated Mueller to go in there, I guess, and arrest Donald Trump, even though we knew early on that you can't, that according to the DOJ, of which he is a part of as special counsel, you can't indict a sitting president. But there was a lot of motivated reasoning there. And that motivated reasoning was certainly not inhibited in any way by various commentators and news readers and cable news outlets. But the bottom line is that cable news does not have the same power it did then, and it did not lead to it did not lead, and I don't think there was ever a danger, it seems to me, of leading to, people who speak Russian getting beat up in Coney Island, or and people make a decent argument that that news outlets, various news outlets, were punished in the wake of this. But I will remind you, they were punished or singled out, deranked, or smeared in some way. Not because of the story that Donald Trump was colluding with the Russian government, but that the Russian government was interfering with the election, which it did.
They certainly
according
tried.
to this. Well, I mean, I don't know that it brought about a different result, but if you're going to believe William Barr, they did. And just like we should not be doing this with Venezuela or any other country, and I'm not shocked that they did, but they did. And so that becomes a pretext to punish different media outlets. I understand that sucks. When there was white nationals, AT&T was ended up through YouTube advertising on Nazi sites. We got demonetized for months. It was scary. But at the end of the day, the investigation ran its course, found that there was no criminal charges that could be pursued. We're not going to know 1/3 of this story by the end of it. I'm convinced of that. There's going to have been fuck ups. There's going to have been cover your ass situations. That's always the case with this. We always see the shadows. We see the reflections, the outlines. But I don't see how the government could have reacted, the apparatus could have reacted any differently. I mean, at any juncture. And Trump was obviously very worried about an investigation. And it turns out he was probably worried about it for a different reason. Because of other criminal activities he's been up to that were a lot more banal. But you start acting that way, they think you might have a body in the trunk, and it turns out all you have is like 10 kilos of cocaine. But if you speed off as the cops coming after you, they're going to act as if they think. I mean, they thought that you might have a body in the car, and you drive down the road, and you speed off. They're going to chase you. So, I mean, I think that's a lot of what we saw in this instance. And
He's definitely guilty of something.
Well, I mean, we know, And that's, that raises a whole nother set of questions as to like, how is it that this guy got away with all this stuff in New York for so long when you have some very ambitious prosecutors? And that is a story I also don't know that we will.
I think they look to service their ambition elsewhere.
Yeah. Well, the question is why? And I think it's probably a different answer depending on who it is. I mean, like we know why, let's say a guy like Schneiderman maybe, who maybe for reasons like he didn't feel comfortable going after Trump because maybe there's a whole host of people he didn't feel comfortable going after because of aspects of his personal life that, but
New York does have a long history of corruption.
Indeed.
Which, brings up questions once again of the level of influence that money has in politics and oligarchs and all that stuff.
Indeed.